Hello, I'm Askat Sherlief and you're watching the news from Kazakhstan. President Nazarbayev called upon ex-banker Mukhtar Ablyazov's companions to take responsibility. During the recent meeting of the Business Council, the president made it clear to businessmen that they would have to answer for supporting the banker in the past when they wrote a letter asking for his pardon. Thus, the head of state has finally stood up for his son-in-law Timur Kulibayev, whom Mukhtar Ablyazov keeps accusing of colossal corruption activities.
Группа его друзей, среди которых был ты, написали мне письменное прошение.
A group of his friends, which you were a part of, wrote me an appeal and gave me written guarantees so that I pardon Ablyazov, who was in jail for corruption. And you vowed that he will serve the country. Now he spat in his friends' faces, whose names I will not specify. Abyazov's name was mentioned a number of times during the recent Businessmen's Council in Astana, which actually looked like some Stalin-era trial. The Attorney General Kairat Mami reported that he is receiving letters from the ex-banker on a weekly basis. According to the law, the applications were accepted for filing. Documentation of Kazmunaygas and several other companies were suppressed for the examination, the prosecutor said. Mukhtar Ablyazov, in his turn, countered this verbally. Recently, Nurlan Smagulov was charged for being a guarantor, just like Mukhtar Jakishev, and supposedly he should be responsible for that. Now, let me emphasize that I think that was precisely the reason for Jakishev's arrest. The president's words confirm the very fact that Jakishev was arrested for being my guarantee. But excuse me, back in Kazakhstan I was not engaged in public policy, which was the authorities' concern. Instead, I dealt with banking activities. In this sense, I think that both Mukhtar Jakishev and Nurlan Smagulov cannot be in charge for my future actions. It would be simply strange to make them responsible for that.
The president's speech at the Business Council also contained guidelines to the Kazakh public. Nazarbayev advised businessmen to live simpler, bankers to not to deal with politics, and altogether to trust domestic banks. Find out next whether any of this can be fulfilled in reality.
There are two problems businessmen have: inspections and the lack of low-interest credit. During the meeting of the Businessmen Council, the president proposed banks to cut businesses some slack, since the state saved banks from the collapse.
Likely there no longer will be low-interest credits anymore, but I believe that we should be rather concerned about these loans being more available for businesses in terms of simplifying some conditions. Credits are often very difficult to obtain, even with these high interest rates.
The appeal to trust Kazakh banks was totally unexpected. At the same time, three major companies, BTA Bank, Allianz Bank and Astana Finance, are currently busy with debt restructuring. Financial analysts see the president's attention as a concern that the industrialization program can fail. After all, Kazakhstan should become the key regional business platform.
If the banks will continue to reduce crediting with the same rate, the very program of industrialization will be doomed to failure. Therefore, the president asks to develop crediting system by lowering interest rates.
The head of the international rating agency believes that the root of the problem is not the financial system, but the Kazakh society.
I really like the president's new approach. I think he has a right intention, yet it is difficult to implement. The thing is, I see that a clan structure is a part of the Kazakh economy. There are alignments that help specific groups and work against others. Banks are also part of this system.
The head of state, however, has his own vision. He advised bankers to be less involved in politics and businessmen to live more humbly and not to stand out from the crowd of regular citizens.
Sarayarka District Court of Astana decided to leave without considering Kazhimkan Masimov's action. The Prime Minister's father sued human rights activist Talas Sagambayev, asking for $70,000 in compensation for moral damage caused by Sagambayev's publications in media.
Prime Minister's father failed to convince the judges to accept his complaint for the consideration. Through the Sarayarka court, Kazhimkan Masimov demanded the human rights activist Talas Sagimbayev to compensate him for moral damages allegedly caused by numerous press publications. However, Masimov Sr. did not present any claims to journalists, which was the reason for the action denial. After the announcement, Talas Sagimbayev called Masimov's people criminals. In particular, he mentioned Aliya Matayeva, who has a criminal record.
If she has prior convictions, how could she possibly be representing the interests of Masimov Sr.? This is a proof that he is supported by ex-criminals. What kind of a group of companions is this? The Prime Minister should learn about it today and resign.
Human rights activist Talas Agimbayev intends to make Kazhimkan Masimov return the money to the defrauded real estate investors. He continued to claim that Premier's father did not fulfill the contract obligations to construct a cottage town in Shymkent. Masimov, according to Sagimbayev, owes around $500,000 to the investors.
Kazakhstan.
Askar Kulibayev's threats of execution are not criminally punishable. The father of the president's son-in-law didn't specify to whom exactly he issued a death sentence. Apparently, until vague threats turn into real ones, no one will protect the interests of journalists.
Lawyers state that Askar Kulibayev will not be punished for making his threats because he did not say specifically which journalist should be executed for covering the scandal linked to his son, the son-in-law of President Nazarbayev. In response, the chief editors of newspapers Vzгляд and Голос Республики, Igor Vinyavsky and Tatiana Trubacheva, filed an action to the city prosecutor's office, asking it to shield reporters against the possible physical reprisal. We were asked whether Askar Kulibayev mentioned explicitly our names, to which we replied that of course not. But because our staffs are actively writing about the scandal linked to Timur Kulibayev, we see his words being directing at us. The Almaty Internal Affairs Department officials are examining the case. On February 23rd, investigator Asif Namazov talked to journalists and then promised to make Askar Kulibayev write an explanation in the course of the next 3 days. It is unfortunately unknown whether Kulibayev personally visited the police, especially since lawyer Ganna Krasilnikova says it will not make any difference, as the threats were not addressed directly. According to the criminal code, threats should be real and made against specific people. But in his statement, Askar Kulibayev does not mention any names. According to the legislation, a failure to appear in the DIA in the 3-day term leads to a court case. Unfortunately, investigator Asif Namazov refused to answer journalist questions by phone. Apparently, he also believes the criminal code will prove Kulibayev's innocence.
On Monday, Mukhtar Jakishev's trial moved to its next stage, the disclosure of case materials. At the same time, the presiding judge ignored all objections of the defendants, saying they are simply delaying the process.
The attorney of the former president of the uranium company said after the last hearing that the court is rushing with the pronouncement of the case materials. The interrogation of defendants will begin already next week. Meanwhile, the defendants have not yet familiarized themselves with all of the case materials. As a result, there may be difficulties and arguments during their interrogation, claims Bisikev. At the moment, the judge's intent to arrest the lawyer was just a warning. Bisikev suggests that the court attempts to stop him from participating in the trial and then make a quick verdict to Mukhtar Jakishev. The judge requested Mukhtar Jakishev to talk with me about not making further motions or objections. My client replied that he shares my views, that the court is not impartial towards him.